All right, so I'm sitting here with some of the most brilliant people in the world. I feel very, very privileged and honored. So my husband, Dan Hawk, started off the morning talking about inclusion and all of the issues with Native Americans. And I just wanted to ask you, what do you think is going to, are you hopeful for the future for Native Americans?
I am hopeful for Native Americans. My whole itinerary in life right now is getting world indigenous populations in space, right? And I think that's necessary because the way that our environment is, that it's necessary to monitor our environment, monitor our resources, habitats and climate change, as I mentioned. So we can argue that there's a lot of satellites up there doing the same thing, right? So why is it that indigenous people need to go to space? As I mentioned about tribal space sovereignty, it's an issue of, one is a sovereignty issue, the other is having data sovereignty, having the ability to own and to be able to have the data to be able to make firsthand decisions is how you preserve culture into the future, right? So you could say that the data's coming down, somebody else gets it, and then they just hand it over to tribal governments, and then they can make a decision from that. That is not what sovereignty is about. So we can say then again, well, as Mariba was talking about, that our orbital altitudes are becoming congested. It becomes a social justice issue for indigenous people to go into space when they want to, at a time that they can, when there's increasing debris that they need to deal with. So that is no longer an equal access issue, that is a social justice issue. So by placing a satellite in orbit, now that somehow takes the social justice issue away, I don't feel that in that way, because we are actually contributing by putting another satellite in orbit that we are actually increasing the debris over time. But where is the equality there? Where is that? Because when we talked to Richard Dalbello about this, and I asked him the question at a Space Traffic Management Conference, I asked him about this issue about social justice, and he said, well, it was about first come, first serve. But if you're indigenous and you're a population that is not spacefaring, because there are some spacefaring nations that would like to go into space but are not spacefaring, but if they're indigenous populations and they would like to go into space, at what time in the future can they go to space and then have some type of equal access to space if we continue to increase debris? So it's a very difficult question as to how I see us in the future. But I do know this, that there are many things, and I say this a lot, there are many things on Earth that are important, but few things as important as our orbital space, because we need to monitor for weather satellites, we need communications, we need those things from space. So if our orbital space becomes to the point to where we can't use it, it's going to harm everyone.
So Namrata, you must be very excited about what's happened with India and how it just catapulted you up with all of your hard work and all of the books you've written and all of the knowledge that you've known onto television. You've been on CNN, you've been all over the place. How has this affected you personally? How do you feel about your role now as the face of India on American television? And what are your hopes for the future of the Indian space program?
Thank you for that question. That's actually a very deep question to answer. So So personally, when I saw India land on the moon, especially after I have seen how the Indian space program has been conceived historically, the other important thing is that, which Dan was alluding to. So I also grew up in a very remote area of Northeast India, in the mountains. And I have said this in my TED Talk as well, that growing up, we would lose power very frequently, and so, but that gave us actually a joy. Instead of complaining, we got access to the beautiful night sky and starlight, and so we grew up in this really beautiful area. So a person like me, especially a woman, and also the fact that growing up, we would hear about India's desire to become a technologically competent power. So when I saw India land on the moon, and I know almost all the media channels asked me this, how did I personally feel? I saw three very critical things, personally and also for humans, but also for women in general, which is that a lot of women contributed to India's success in going to the moon. In the Chandrayaan-3 mission, there were 53 women. Scientists and engineers, and they came from very humble backgrounds. So that is very inspiring to the millions of girl child, as we say in India, that saw that feat. So that's personally also very, very humbling and also empowering. The second important thing that the Chandrayaan-3 mission and India's success story is that India has done this indigenously, but also now starting to look at itself as a global partner with the United States. And I think that's a very good thing for the world, because the world's largest democracy and the world's most oldest modern democracy is coming together. So that's very satisfying for me in terms of my work. And then the final question as to how did I feel being called actually globally when India landed. And so I felt a sense of, actually I felt humbled by it. And I felt a sense of responsibility to explain the scientific basis of the mission. I was also asked questions very frequently as to how does India justify this mission, because it's $75 million, which can be used for something else in India, right? And so I realized that that question had a little bit of the underpinnings of viewing India from the 1940s and the 1950s. India is a very different country today, and I felt that it was my responsibility to explain to people globally that space contributes to poverty alleviation. Space contributes to Indian farmers using satellite for weather forecasting, looking at the monsoon, which is very important. Space has helped India to digitize its economy, lifted millions out of the difficulty of having communication. So I think, so India's moon mission, with the hope that it would bring spin-off technologies, create more understanding of the universe, and contribute to the education of Indian children, but also globally, is a very inspiring story to me.
Thank you very much. So, Takeshi Hakamada, it was so wonderfully and inspiring to see how you just came from your original ideas about Star Wars to become the first commercial person in Japan to create a company and go heading towards the moon. I would just like to ask you about your personal experiences in the whole thing and what your plans are for iSpace and Japan in the future.
Thank you very much. Well, I inspired by Star Wars movie in my childhood, but well, my current vision is how to create ecosystem in space, more sustainable existence of the human beings in space, and then this gonna be, I think, very important for the humankind, not living in space, but also to support sustainability of the Earth as well. We are going to this space because we want to keep living on the Earth. I don't think, the human is escaping from the Earth to the outer space, but we are going to the space to keep living on the Earth. And then in order to keep living on the Earth, we need to utilize the asset from the space. And then the current issue is viable economical reasoning. We need to reduce the cost to do activity in space. Otherwise, we cannot keep using this space economically viable way. And then the space resource utilization, I believe, the key for the future. So even though I started this company activity from Japan, and I am Japanese, I'm proud of that. However, it's more like international global activities. Japan is not only the player to do this. I encourage the more international people, not only Japan or other nations and then players involved in this activity. That's why even though I started iSpace from Japan, but we are currently very global, a multinational organization, and then more than 50% our employees are non-Japanese already. So I hope we are leading a more international, initiative in the future.
And you're young, so you'll probably see it happen. So I hope it doesn't take you 35 years like it's taken me to get to this point. So I would like to say that your presentation, Matt Greenhouse, on the Webb telescope was one of the most interesting things I've ever seen, and I learned so much from you. I was wondering, what have you learned that has surprised you, and what is your true belief in the question that everybody wants to know: where are we going to live next? Is there a spot?
Okay, well, what surprised me? I started on the web in 1996, and I was a young astronomer just having completed my postdoc, which is the first job you get when you become a scientist. And so, all I knew was a little bit of astronomy. And, I had built some small science instruments for ground-based telescopes, so I knew a little tiny bit of engineering and almost nothing about project management. And then I was on this project that turned out to be more than $8 billion in 25 years, and spread all over the world with a team of many, many thousands of people. So, I learned a lot about project management, and I learned a lot about engineering. And, I really learned what it takes to do projects like this, and that went way beyond the sort of thing, book learning and experiences I had in college and as a postdoc. So that really changed me a lot. Where are we going to live next? I think we're going to stay right on the Earth. We're going to stay right on the Earth, and we're going to clean up our act and make sure that we don't destroy the Earth.
That's wonderful. Okay. So, is Google going into space?
Well, Google had a project at one time that involved some satellite communications, but eventually it didn't look like it was going to be viable as a business, and so we exited that. We have worked with SpaceX to put in ground station support for Starlink. At the moment, I'm not aware of any current space operations other than ground station support.
Do you have any other endeavors that you're thinking about for space that you would like to see accomplished in your lifetime?
Well, there was one, I'm not sure that I remember the exact name, but wasn't there a company called Planetary Resources that was going to do asteroid mining? And I kept thinking about the $1 trillion asteroid that was out there waiting to be discovered. That didn't pan out too well, I think, because the economics of getting into space sufficient to do that kind of mining still wasn't quite there. I think it would be really cool if I could live long enough to see somebody land on Mars. But I'll be 95 by that time, most likely, assuming that that's not earlier than 2035. So that's an aspiration. I have a different thing that's keeping me going. I have a wine cellar that has a couple thousand bottles left in it. And so my plan is that my wife and I are going to drink it all before we die. And so we'll have to stay alive long enough to drink 2,000 bottles of wine. That's my health plan.